My name is Zoe Miller. I am 58 years old, a widow and the mother of one son, Ethan. For most of my life, I worked quietly, first as an accountant, later building businesses that no one in my family ever really cared to understand. People saw me as ordinary, almost invisible. That was fine with me, until the night I paid for my son's lavish wedding and watched him use his speech to mock my so-called poor life in front of 500 guests. I just smiled. I stayed silent. And then the bride's father, a powerful CEO, went pale when he heard my name and asked for the microphone. The words he spoke after that moment made my son beg me for forgiveness. The memory of that evening still burns in my chest. Picture it. Crystal chandeliers raining light across a ballroom dressed in ivory and gold, 500 guests in black ties and evening gowns sipping champagne that cost more than I used to make in a week. A string quartet filled the air with music so sweet it almost covered the low hum of gossip. Everything looked perfect. I wanted it to be perfect. After all, I had paid for every single detail, the flowers, the venue, the music, even the imported wine. I had written the checks without complaint because I believed deep down that my son deserved a wedding that reflected how much I loved him. I told myself I did not need credit. I told myself it was enough to watch Ethan smile, to see him step into a new life with the woman he loved. But as he stood under the lights, microphone in hand, and began his speech, I realized I had been terribly wrong. He looked handsome, confident, proud. And then he said, with a smirk that cut me like glass, "I want to thank my mother, who has given her whole life to me. She drives an old Honda, she lives in a little apartment, but at least she found enough money to pay for this wedding. I guess even poor people can make dreams come true." Laughter erupted across the room, real, sharp, unkind laughter. His friends slapped his back. His new colleagues doubled over with amusement. Even distant relatives smiled as though it were the funniest thing they had ever heard. Ethan grinned wider, feeding on their laughter, adding more. My mom has always been frugal, maybe too frugal, but tonight she proved that being poor doesn't always mean being useless. I sat at the front table, my smile frozen in place, my fingers curled around the old silver wedding band I wore on a chain beneath my dress. That ring was the last piece of my late husband I carried with me. I held it tight, as though squeezing it could stop my heart from breaking. My son's words echoed in my ears. Poor, useless. In front of 500 people, he stripped me of dignity and wore my sacrifice like a joke. I could hear the whispers, the condescending chuckles. One woman near me leaned toward another and said, "At least she paid for something worthwhile before her retirement years." Another guest added, "Maybe she wanted this night to be her one claim to importance." Their words burned. I wanted to stand up to shout that they were wrong, that I was more than what my son had painted me to be, but I stayed quiet. I smiled, and then I saw him. Charles Whitman, the father of the bride, a man known across the city as a ruthless, wealthy CEO. He had been laughing politely with the others, until Ethan said my name. When Charles heard it, his face drained of color. He set his champagne glass down so quickly it nearly tipped. His eyes darted to me, and for the first time that evening, silence spread across his features like a shadow. He mouthed something I could barely catch. "Zoe." "Miller? Miller Holdings?" In that instant, I knew. The secret I had carried quietly for years, my work, my sacrifices, my success, was about to step into the light whether I wanted it to or not. Charles rose from his chair, his movements stiff with urgency. He walked toward the stage, his gaze fixed on me the entire time. Guests noticed. Conversations faltered. By the time he reached my son, people were leaning forward, curious, unsettled. Charles took the microphone from Ethan's hand with a grip that allowed no argument. My son laughed nervously, confused, still oblivious to what was happening. The music had stopped. The laughter died. 500 faces turned to watch. I sat there, the silver ring still clutched in my palm, my heart pounding like thunder in my chest. I knew what was coming, and I also knew that once the truth was spoken aloud, nothing in my family, nothing in that room, and nothing in my son's life would ever be the same again. Before I tell you what Charles said into that microphone, the words that made my son crumble, I need to take you back. Back to the years of quiet struggle, to the moments when my life was nothing but sacrifice and doubt, and to the choices I made that led to the most unexpected kind of revenge. But let me pause for a moment here. If you are still listening, if you have felt the sting of being underestimated, dismissed, or laughed at by your own family, then I invite you to stay with me. This is not just my story, it might be yours too. Share in the comments where you are watching from, because I believe stories like this connect us all. And if you want to hear more stories of women who found strength in silence, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. Now let me take you back to the beginning. After that night at the wedding, when the world seemed to turn upside down in a single gasp of silence, I often found myself reaching for the same thing I held in my hand while my son mocked me. It was not a checkbook, not a contract, not even the microphone that could have defended me. It was the simple silver wedding ring of my late husband, a ring I wore on a chain around my neck. That ring was my anchor. It carried both the weight of memory and the strength of survival. I became a widow at 48. My husband, Daniel, was my first love. The man who believed in my quiet resilience long before I believed in myself. He worked as a school teacher, gentle in spirit, patient with children, a man who never measured life by bank accounts or status. When cancer stole him from me, I felt as though the floor beneath my feet gave way. Suddenly, it was just me and our son, Ethan. In those early months, I remember lying awake at night, the silver ring pressed in my palm, whispering prayers that my boy would never feel the emptiness I felt. I told myself that if I carried enough for the both of us, if I worked hard enough, Ethan could still have a life untouched by despair. That promise became my purpose. Ethan was 12 then, lanky and curious, full of dreams that outpaced our modest means. He would sprawl on the living room floor with comic books and science kits, asking questions about galaxies and inventions. I would watch him and see Daniel's spark in his eyes, that hunger for more than what we had, and I vowed to give it to him. I took every job I could find. By day, I balanced books for small shops. By night, I washed dishes in restaurants that smelled of garlic and smoke. I went without new clothes, without vacations, without even heating the apartment some winters, just to save enough for Ethan's education. Each time exhaustion tempted me to give up, I held that silver ring and remembered Daniel's voice. "You are stronger than you know, Zoe." One winter evening, when Ethan was 14, he came into the kitchen while I was sorting receipts. His voice cracked with adolescence, yet his words pierced me like an arrow. "Mom, why don't we have what other families have? Why is our car so old? Why do we live in this tiny place?" I forced a smile, hiding the sting in my chest, because we are building something bigger than cars or apartments. We are building your future. He rolled his eyes, unconvinced, and shuffled away. I sat there afterward, clutching the ring, whispering to the empty room, "Just let him be happy, Daniel." I will endure anything if it means Ethan smiles. That became my mantra, the sentence carved into my bones. As long as my son is happy, I will endure any humiliation. I believed it with all I had. Years passed, and Ethan grew into a young man whose charm often overshadowed his gratitude. He was bright, ambitious, determined to fit into a world that measured worth by outward wealth. I wanted to guide him gently, to teach him that humility and compassion carried more weight than status symbols. But he was not interested in lessons from his widowed mother. He wanted the life he saw flashing across television screens and social media feeds. I did not argue. Instead, I kept building in silence. By the time he left for college, the small accounting work I had pieced together had evolved into something more. I had begun investing, cautiously at first, then more boldly, in companies teetering on the edge of collapse. I used the same discipline that had carried me through long nights of bills and receipts, and slowly, piece by piece, a new life took shape. Ethan never asked where the tuition money came from. He simply accepted it, as though it were owed to him. Still, I never stopped seeing the boy on the living room floor, reading comics under a dim lamp, and I never stopped clutching that silver ring in moments of doubt. Every sacrifice felt worth it if it shielded him from struggle. I told myself that the day would come when he would see, when he would finally look at me and understand. What I did not realize then was how deeply silence can be mistaken for weakness and how easily sacrifice can be misread as failure. I thought love alone would teach him respect. Instead, my silence fed his illusion that I was nothing more than a poor, aging mother clinging to modest dreams. The truth is, I carried more than he ever knew. I carried the memory of a husband who believed in me, the weight of sleepless nights, the sting of dismissive glances from relatives, and the endless hours of invisible labor. And always, at the center of it all, the silver ring, cool against my skin, steady in my hand, reminding me that I was not powerless. I did not need the world to see me then. I only needed my son to be happy. I thought that was enough. I thought enduring every slight, every whisper, every moment of being underestimated was the price of love. I was wrong. After Daniel's death, life demanded that I become more than a grieving widow. Bills piled high, Ethan's education loomed on the horizon, and the modest salary from bookkeeping barely kept food on the table. I could have surrendered, settled for surviving instead of striving. But something in me refused. Maybe it was Daniel's voice echoing in memory, or maybe it was the silver ring pressed into my palm night after night. Either way, I knew that if I stopped fighting, Ethan's future would shrink before it even began. I started small, balancing the books for neighborhood shops, fixing errors for struggling restaurants, helping local contractors sort through their tax filings. Nothing glamorous, nothing that looked like ambition to the outside world. To them, I was just a middle-aged widow keeping herself busy. But I saw something more. I saw inefficiencies, patterns, businesses gasping for air that only needed someone disciplined enough to steady them. One night, sitting at my kitchen table littered with receipts, I stared at the numbers of a failing dry cleaning business. The owner had begged me for advice, desperate to avoid closing his doors. I realized then that I had more than skills. I had insight. If I could tighten his operations, restructure his payments, and find creative ways to stretch his limited cash flow, he could survive. And he did. Within 6 months, he was turning a modest profit again. The small check he gave me for my work meant less than the look of relief on his face. That success sparked a fire. I began looking at distressed businesses not as burdens, but as opportunities. The more I studied, the more I saw a pattern. Companies that could be saved with the right guidance, the right discipline, the right vision. I did not have deep pockets, but I had patience, and patience can be more valuable than capital. The first time I dared to sign an acquisition contract, I used a pen I had bought from a discount store. It was cheap, plastic, the ink sometimes skipping when the angle was wrong. Yet when I pressed it to the paper, my hand steady, my heart trembling, I felt as though I was engraving my future. That pen became my second anchor, as symbolic as Daniel's silver ring. Each signature reminded me that I was building not just businesses, but a legacy that Ethan might one day respect. I called it Miller Holdings, a name plain enough to draw no attention, but strong enough to carry the weight of what I intended. At first, it was nothing more than me in my apartment, stacks of files around me, spreadsheets glowing from an outdated laptop. But with each acquisition, each turnaround, the name began to mean something real. Miller Holdings became a shield I could hide behind, a mask that allowed me to grow powerful without the scrutiny of those who would laugh at the idea of a widow past 50 reinventing herself. From the outside, nothing changed. I still lived in the same small apartment, still drove the same old Honda, still wore clothes that had seen too many wash cycles. Neighbors thought I was just stubborn, refusing to upgrade my life. Even Ethan rolled his eyes when I insisted that money should not be wasted on appearances. He wanted me to look successful, to prove something to the world. But I knew better. True power does not need to announce itself. It waits. It builds. Keeping my life modest gave me freedom. I could reinvest every dollar, grow quietly, and let others underestimate me. Their underestimation was my armor. It gave me space to work without expectation or interference. It let me watch opportunities that others ignored because they assumed I lacked the means to seize them. And seize them I did. A small trucking company no bank believed in, a construction supplier on the verge of bankruptcy, a tech support firm struggling with debt. Each one reshaped under my guidance, folded into the foundation of Miller Holdings. The portfolio grew, steady and solid, brick by invisible brick. Yet even as I watched the numbers rise, as contracts multiplied, I stayed silent. I never announced my victories at family dinners. I never boasted to Ethan when I wrote tuition checks larger than my entire salary used to be. I never told friends that the widow they pitied was building an empire from the ground up. Instead, I held Daniel's ring and whispered, "This is for him. This is for us. And one day, maybe, for our son." But as I grew stronger, Ethan grew more distant. The more I gave, the less he asked how I managed. He accepted my sacrifices like air, invisible and assumed. I told myself it was fine, that it was love, that silence was the nobler path. What I did not see then was the seed of disdain growing quietly in his heart. To him, my modest life was proof of mediocrity, not a choice made from strength. I thought I was protecting him. Instead, I was teaching him to dismiss me. The more Miller Holdings grew, the less anyone seemed to believe in it. To the outside world, I was still the widow who balanced books for small businesses, the woman who drove an old Honda and lived in a modest apartment. People rarely looked beyond appearances. They believed what they could see, and what they saw was a woman past 50 clinging to modest routines. They could not imagine that behind my closed door, files stacked high and contracts signed with that cheap pen were slowly forming an empire. Family gatherings became the first stage of dismissal. At Thanksgiving, while relatives bragged about their new cars or promotions, I would mention a client I had helped or a small acquisition that had stabilized. Their eyes glazed over. One cousin laughed outright, saying, "Zoe, you're so cute, playing entrepreneur at your age. Retirement will come before your empire ever does." The room chuckled and I smiled, swallowing the sting. They thought they were teasing, but I felt the sharp edge of ridicule beneath every word. Even my sister Margaret, whom I had supported countless times, leaned in with her patronizing smile. "Zoe, dear, why not find something stable? You missed your chance for adventure years ago. At our age, safety is better than dreams." She meant well, or at least she told herself she did. But what she really meant was, sit down. Stay small. Do not embarrass yourself by wanting more. Ethan was no different. Perhaps he was worse because his opinion mattered most. Each time I tried to share news of a new contract or a turnaround story, he barely listened. He scrolled on his phone or checked messages, nodding absently. Once, when I told him I had finalized the acquisition of a struggling logistics firm, he looked up with a smirk. "That's nice, Mom. But maybe you should stop calling it acquisitions. You make it sound bigger than it is. It's basically paperwork, right?" His words cut deeper than he realized. paperwork. To him, my life's work was reduced to signatures and receipts, not vision or strategy. I wanted to shake him, to tell him that the trucks rolling down highways now bore my mark, that hundreds of employees depended on decisions I had made. Instead, I stayed silent. I told myself there would be a day when he would see. The loneliness of dismissal grew heavier as friends added their voices. Old neighbors stopped by for coffee, smiling as they spoke about their grandchildren or retirement plans. When I tried to share the excitement of building something, they leaned forward with gentle condescension. "It's wonderful that you have a hobby, Zoe. Keeps you busy, doesn't it? Some women take up knitting. You take up business." Their laughter was light, but my chest ached under its weight. Then there was Helen. She'd been my friend since high school, a woman who had walked through her own storms. She was not wealthy, not powerful, but she had the kind of empathy that others lacked. One afternoon, as we sipped tea in my kitchen, she noticed the pile of contracts on the table. "You've been at this for years now, haven't you?" she asked softly. I nodded, bracing for the usual dismissal, but instead she studied me, her brow furrowing. "They don't believe you, do they? They think you're pretending." Tears pricked my eyes at the truth of it. "They think I'm delusional. They think I'm too old, too foolish, chasing something beyond my reach." Helen reached across the table and took my hand. "Let them think it. One day when they see, the shock will be louder than their laughter. Until then, keep building. You're stronger than their disbelief." Her words steadied me. She became the foil to everyone else, the quiet voice reminding me that I was not insane for believing in myself. Even so, her support was a whisper against the roar of dismissal that surrounded me. I remember one evening vividly. Ethan had come home for dinner, his eyes glowing with excitement about a colleague's promotion. I told him gently that I was proud of my latest acquisition, a construction supply firm that had been drowning in debt but was now breaking even. He set down his fork and sighed. "Mom, you're 60. Maybe it's time to stop pretending you're some kind of CEO. People your age are supposed to relax, not chase business dreams." I smiled, but inside my heart shattered. I wanted to scream that I was not pretending, that I was leading 6 companies, that I was securing futures for more people than he could imagine. Instead, I excused myself to the kitchen, clutching Daniel's silver ring beneath my blouse, whispering into the silence, "As long as he is happy, I will endure it." That was the cruelest irony. My sacrifices were real, my empire tangible. But because I chose humility, even my own son could not see me. In their eyes, I was a woman lost in illusions. In truth, I was building a reality larger than they could comprehend. The night before the wedding, the house was quiet in a way that almost felt holy. The dress was pressed, the flowers ordered, the guest list confirmed. Every detail had been paid for, arranged, perfected. I should have felt satisfaction, even pride, but instead I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the silver wedding ring resting in my palm. The chain that usually held it around my neck lay coiled beside me, and for once I let the cool metal sit openly against my skin. I traced the curve of the ring with my thumb, whispering words to a man who had been gone for 10 years. "Daniel, can you see me now? Can you see what I've done? I kept my promise. I raised Ethan. I gave him everything I could, even when I had nothing left to give." My voice broke, but I pressed on. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I built something strong enough, he would be proud. But tomorrow, on the biggest day of his life, I do not know if he will see me at all. The lamp on the table cast a dim glow, soft shadows stretching across the room. I remembered Daniel sitting in that very chair, reading papers for his students, pausing only to smile at me when our eyes met. He had always believed that dignity came not from wealth, but from character. "Respect yourself, Zoe," he used to say, and the right people will respect you too. But what about when the wrong people laughed louder than the right people could speak? What about when your own son rolled his eyes and dismissed your work as fantasy? My empire was real, more real than anyone could imagine, but it lived in silence, hidden behind modest clothes and a modest car. The question haunted me. Should I reveal it? Should I walk into that ballroom tomorrow with my head high and announce what Miller Holdings truly was? Should I finally demand the respect I had earned? The thought made my chest tighten. I imagined Ethan's face, his pride collapsing under the weight of revelation. Would he hate me for stealing his spotlight? Would he resent me for exposing the truth in front of strangers? Or would he at last see me? I closed my eyes, clutching the ring tightly. Love whispered one answer. Pride whispered another. Love said, "Stay quiet, let him shine, even if it costs you your dignity." Pride said, "This is your moment too. You have bled for him. You deserve to be acknowledged." I sat there for hours, torn between the two voices, unable to silence either. The phone rang, breaking the stillness. It was Helen. I hesitated, then answered. "Zoe," she said warmly, "I just wanted to call and wish you well for tomorrow. Big day, isn't it? Your boy is getting married." I smiled faintly into the empty room. "Yes, Helen, it's a big day." She was quiet for a moment, then her tone softened. "Listen to me. Do not expect gratitude tomorrow. Weddings are noisy, selfish events. Everyone will be looking at themselves, not at you. Ethan will not thank you the way he should. You know this." Her words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. "Then what should I do?" I asked, my voice low. "Prepare your heart," she replied. "Do not let disappointment surprise you. You have built a fortress in silence. Let it protect you. And remember, no matter what happens, I see you. I know what you are." Tears filled my eyes. I wanted to believe her reassurance would be enough, but I also knew how deeply tomorrow's wounds could cut. "Thank you, Helen," I whispered. "You are kinder than you know." After we said goodbye, I sat in the silence again, the ring still in my palm. The clock ticked, steadily, marking the last hours before the world shifted. I felt the weight of both possibility and dread pressing down on me. At last, I stood and slipped the ring back onto its chain, fastening it around my neck where it belonged. I walked to the window and looked out over the city lights, glittering like 1,000 eyes. My reflection stared back at me, weary but unbroken. I rested my forehead against the glass and spoke aloud, so quietly it was almost a prayer. "All I ask, Ethan, is that tomorrow you do not turn me into a joke. Just for once, let me be your mother with dignity. Do not make me your punchline." The night swallowed my words, and I knew there would be no answer until the morning came. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of invoices and contracts. Not the kind of contracts I usually signed with my battered pen, but checks written for caterers, florists, and venues. Every page I signed felt heavier than the last. The numbers were staggering, enough to buy another company outright, enough to secure jobs for dozens of people. Instead, I poured it into one single night because my son asked it of me. I told myself it was worth it. Every mother wants to see her child walk into marriage surrounded by beauty, respected by his peers, certain of his place in the world. If signing away small fortunes gave Ethan that, then I would do it. I sat at my kitchen table one evening, the checkbook open, my hand steady, but my heart uncertain. "This is not an investment," I whispered to myself. "This is love." Yet even as I said it, I knew love was not supposed to feel like bleeding yourself dry. The vendors praised me politely. "You are so generous, Mrs. Miller," one said as I signed for a shipment of imported roses. Another murmured, "Most parents would never cover this much." They saw me as a mother stretching beyond her means, not as a woman who could have bought the entire venue outright if she wished. I let them believe it. I had grown accustomed to being underestimated. One afternoon, as we reviewed the final seating charts, Ethan leaned back in his chair and studied me with a mix of impatience and condescension. "Mom, you have done enough. Just, please, tomorrow, sit quietly. Don't talk about your business. Don't mention any of that consulting stuff. Just blend in. This is about me and Emily, not about you." I stared at him, stunned by the sharpness of his tone. "Ethan, I never intended to take attention from you. He cut me off with a wave of his hand. I know. You mean well, but sometimes you make things awkward. People don't need to hear about your little projects. Just enjoy the night. Don't embarrass me." The words pierced deeper than any insult from strangers ever could. Embarrass me. After all I had given, after every sacrifice, my greatest crime in his eyes was daring to exist outside of his spotlight. I pressed my lips together and nodded. Of course, Ethan. I will stay quiet. That night, when I returned home, I pulled out the silver ring again, holding it tightly as though Daniel might somehow hear me. Did we raise him wrong? I whispered into the dark. Or did I raise him too well? Did I shield him so completely that he never learned to see me? The next morning, another invoice arrived. I wrote the check with mechanical precision, though inside I felt hollow. Each stroke of the pen felt less like love and more like signing my own sentence. I imagined the laughter that might come, the whispers, the eyes glancing at me and seeing only a poor widow pretending to belong in a glittering world. I wondered if I was buying my son's happiness or funding my own humiliation. Still, I pushed on. I approved the custom menu, nodded at the string quartet rehearsal, even agreed to an extravagant lighting design that painted the ballroom in gold. Each detail was chosen not by me, but by Ethan and Emily, yet every one of them bore my signature. My name at the bottom of the check was invisible ink to them, unseen and unvalued. Helen stopped by a few days before the wedding, bringing a basket of muffins as though I had time to eat. She looked at the pile of receipts and shook her head. "Zoe, this is too much. You are carrying the whole thing alone. Why doesn't Ethan see that?" I forced a smile. "Because he is young, Helen. Because he thinks this is normal. And maybe that's my fault. I never let him see how hard it was." She sighed. "Just promise me you will not expect gratitude. Expect nothing, and you will not be disappointed." Her words echoed through me long after she left. Expect nothing. Yet wasn't that the tragedy? I had expected so little, given so much, and still the wound of dismissal deepened. As I stacked the checks neatly into a folder, ready to deliver to the coordinator, I paused. For a moment, I considered tearing one in half, refusing to pay for a single flower more. But then I saw Ethan's face in my memory. The boy who once sat cross-legged on the floor with comic books, dreaming of worlds bigger than our small apartment. I could not take that dream from him, even now. So I signed the last check, closed the folder, and whispered to the silence, "I only wanted to see you happy, Ethan." I never knew I was writing the terms of my own betrayal. The night of the wedding arrived in a cascade of gold and crystal. The ballroom shimmered beneath towering chandeliers, their light scattering across walls draped in white silk. 500 guests filled the space, their laughter rising above the soft melodies of the string quartet. Waiters glided between tables with trays of champagne flutes, the air scented with roses and rich food. It was a scene worthy of magazines, extravagant in every detail, and all of it bore my invisible signature. I sat near the front, close enough to see Ethan's face clearly, yet far enough that most eyes passed over me without notice. My dress was simple, navy blue, chosen carefully so as not to outshine anyone. I told myself this night belonged to him, that my joy would come from his happiness. Still, My fingers never left the silver ring resting against my chest. I rubbed it as though Daniel's strength could flow into me, steadying my heart for what was to come. The ceremony had been beautiful, almost unbearably so. When Ethan and Emily exchanged vows, I wiped tears from my eyes, grateful for the love they had found. But gratitude gave way to unease as the reception unfolded. Speeches began, light-hearted stories, jokes from friends, affectionate memories. I smiled politely, applauded at the right moments, even laughed when others did. Yet a quiet tension coiled inside me. Then Ethan stood, my son, my only child. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, his hair neatly combed, his smile bright under the lights. The applause quieted as he raised the microphone. Pride swelled in me for one fleeting second. This was his moment. I prayed silently that he might use it to honor the people who had carried him here. First of all, he began, his voice clear and confident, "Thank you to everyone for being here tonight. This is the happiest day of my life, and I am grateful to share it with all of you." Guests cheered warmly, clinking their glasses. I clapped too, smiling through tears. But then he paused, smirked, and added, "Of course, none of this would be possible without my mom. She has given her whole life to me. She drives an old Honda. She lives in a tiny apartment, but she somehow scraped together enough money to pay for this wedding. I guess even poor people can make dreams come true." The words struck like a slap across my face. For a heartbeat, silence. Then laughter exploded, rolling through the room like thunder. People laughed loudly, some even clapping as though it were the best joke of the night. My smile froze, my chest hollowed. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it above the laughter. Ethan basked in their amusement, lifting his glass as if to toast. "My mom has always been frugal," he went on, his voice growing bolder. "Maybe too frugal, but hey, tonight she proved that even if you spend your life being poor, you can still throw one good party." Another round of laughter, louder than before. His friends at the back whistled, doubling over with glee. Emily's bridesmaids covered their mouths, giggling. Even some of the older relatives chuckled, glancing at me with pity disguised as humor. I wanted to vanish. I wanted to crawl under the table and hide. But instead, I sat still, my hand clutching Daniel's ring so tightly the edge pressed into my skin. I whispered inwardly, "Stay calm. Endure it. Do not let them see you break." Ethan looked directly at me then, smiling with a pride that twisted like a knife. "So thank you, Mom," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Thank you for proving that sometimes even the least likely people can pull off something remarkable. Let's all raise a glass to my mother, living proof that you can't buy class, but you can at least rent it for one night." Glasses lifted, laughter rose again, and the room sparkled with cruel delight. I sat rigid, my throat burning, the ring cutting deeper into my palm. Inside my head, Daniel's voice echoed, "Respect yourself, Zoe. The right people will respect you too." But all I saw were wrong people laughing, and my own son standing at the center of it. As the crowd drank to my humiliation, Ethan leaned toward his groomsmen, whispering something that made them howl with laughter. He looked proud, triumphant, as though mocking me had become his final act of independence. I stayed silent. I smiled, though my heart cracked open. In that moment, surrounded by 500 people, I had never felt more alone. But as I lowered my gaze to the ring in my hand, I knew something he did not. His cruelty was public, but my power remained hidden. And when the truth came, as it always does, it would not whisper. It would roar. The laughter still echoed when I saw him. Charles Whitman, Emily's father, sitting only a few tables away. His reputation preceded him. He was a titan in real estate, a man feared and respected in equal measure. He had laughed politely with the others when Ethan made his cruel jokes, lifting his champagne glass as though playing along. But then Ethan said my name. My full name. Zoe Miller. And in that instant, I watched the blood drain from Charles's face. He froze, his glass halfway to his lips. For a heartbeat, the entire room seemed to slow. His eyes narrowed, focusing on me with sudden intensity, as if he were seeing me for the first time. His hand trembled slightly, and he set the glass down so quickly it nearly toppled. Then his lips moved soundlessly, forming words I could read even from across the room. Zoe Miller? Miller Holdings? My chest tightened, but I did not move. I stayed still, one hand pressed against Daniel's silver ring beneath my dress. The moment had arrived earlier than I expected, yet I felt no urge to speak. This was not my revelation to give. Charles leaned back in his chair, blinking rapidly, his face pale as marble. His wife leaned toward him, whispering, but he brushed her off with a shake of his head. His gaze never left mine. The orchestra's soft music faded into background noise, muted by the pounding of my heart. Slow motion. That is the only way I can describe what happened next. Every laugh around me seemed to stretch, echoing longer than it should. Every flicker of candlelight burned brighter, sharper. I could see the beads of sweat forming along Charles's brow, the nervous twitch of his fingers against the linen tablecloth. He was piecing together what everyone else had missed, and the weight of realization was pressing down hard. Finally, he rose. His chair scraped back, the sound harsh against the polished floor. Conversations faltered nearby. Heads turned. He moved through the crowd with a kind of urgent gravity, his steps measured, his eyes locked on me. Ethan noticed him approaching and grinned, mistaking it for admiration. My son thought his new father-in-law was coming to congratulate him on a well-delivered joke. He had no idea the ground beneath him was about to collapse. Charles reached the stage, standing just behind Ethan. He cleared his throat, holding out his hand. "The microphone, please." Ethan laughed nervously, clearly surprised. "Oh, sure," he said, still smiling. "You want to say something too?" He handed the microphone over, expecting a toast or another round of applause, but Charles's expression was carved from stone. He did not smile. He did not thank the guests. Instead, he glanced down at me, his voice trembling as he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think I have just realized something extraordinary." The room hushed, curiosity rippling through the crowd. Ethan's smile faltered, confusion clouding his features. I stayed silent. My hands rested calmly on the tablecloth, my fingers still wrapped around the hidden ring. Every instinct in me longed to speak, to defend myself, to finally end the humiliation. But I knew the power of silence. I knew that sometimes the most devastating truths are not declared by the wounded, but by the witnesses who cannot unsee what they have learned. Charles continued, his voice steadier now, but still laced with awe. "All evening, we have been laughing. We have been entertained by stories, by jokes. But I know the name Zoe Miller, and I know it not from family introductions or wedding invitations. I know it from business, from contracts, from deals that shaped industries." Gasps rippled through the audience. Heads turned toward me, eyes wide, whispers breaking the silence. Ethan blinked, his face tightening. "What are you talking about?" he asked, a nervous laugh escaping him. "My mom just does consulting. Small-time stuff. It's nothing serious." Charles shook his head slowly, staring directly at me as though daring me to deny it. "Is that true, Mrs. Miller? Or should I call you Ms. Miller, the one who signed the acquisition deal with my company just last year? The one whose signature, written with a shaky blue pen, sits on contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars?" My heart pounded, but I did not answer. Silence stretched, heavy and electric. My son's eyes darted between us, panic flickering in his expression. I let the moment breathe, my silence louder than any protest. Slowly, deliberately, I lifted my gaze to meet Charles's. I inclined my head by the smallest fraction, not a nod, not a confession, just enough. His face shifted from doubt to certainty. He turned back to the crowd, gripping the microphone tighter. "I was right," he said, his voice ringing through the hall. "This woman, the mother of the groom, is not who you think she is. This is Zoe Miller of Miller Holdings." The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Ethan's face went pale, his jaw slack. The laughter that had mocked me minutes before dissolved into silence, replaced by confusion, fear, and dawning respect. And still, I said nothing, because silence in that moment was power. When Charles's words filled the ballroom, the atmosphere cracked like glass. This woman is Zoe Miller of Miller Holdings. The sound of my name, paired with the company no one thought I could ever create, silenced 500 guests in a single breath. The chandeliers still glittered, the music had long stopped, and the air thickened as realization spread across every face. I sat still, my hands folded neatly on the table, my pulse racing beneath a calm exterior. Inside, my heart trembled, but outside, I gave them nothing. I had learned long ago that silence often speaks louder than words, and in that silence the laughter of moments before dissolved into shame. Ethan stood frozen, his face drained of color. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His new bride clutched his arm, her own eyes darting between her father and me, unsure of what to believe. The very people who had raised their glasses in mocking toast now stared at me with awe, some with guilt, others with naked fear. Charles's voice grew stronger as he continued. "For those who do not know, Miller Holdings has quietly acquired company after company these past few years. Logistics, construction, technology, businesses that many thought were doomed, and every signature on those contracts belongs to her. Not a hobbyist, not a delusional dreamer, but a woman who commands an empire." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I could feel their stares pressing down on me, searching for confirmation, for denial, for anything. I stayed seated, still clutching Daniel's silver ring beneath the tablecloth, letting them drown in the weight of their own misjudgment. At last, Ethan found his voice, though it cracked under the strain. "Mom, is this true? Did you really?" His words trailed off, his eyes wide, pleading for me to contradict Charles, pleading for me to spare him the humiliation of truth. I turned my head slowly, meeting his gaze. My voice was calm, almost tender, but every word carried the gravity of years unspoken. "The most painful part, Ethan, is not that you did not know. The most painful part is that you never wanted to know." His shoulders sagged as though struck. He opened his mouth again, but no words came. Around us, the crowd's whispers grew louder, rising like a storm. From the far side of the room, I heard the sound of quiet sobbing. My eyes found Helen, seated at the edge of the hall, her hand pressed to her mouth. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked at me, her expression a mixture of sorrow and vindication. She had always told me the day would come, the day when disbelief would shatter into truth. And now that it had, the weight of it was almost too much for her to bear. The sight of her crying pierced me in a way the laughter never could. Helen had been my mirror, my confidant, the one who believed when no one else did. In her tears, I saw the years of dismissal reflected back at me, not just mine, but hers as well. For a moment, I wanted to stand, to comfort her, but I stayed rooted in my chair. Tonight, silence was my armor, and I could not abandon it now. Ethan stumbled forward, nearly tripping over his own feet as he approached my table. "Mom, why didn't you tell me? Why keep it a secret? You let me think—" His voice broke, choked with desperation. I looked up at him, my tone steady. Every time I tried to share a victory, you rolled your eyes. Every time I wanted to tell you the truth, you changed the subject. You told me my dreams had expiration dates. You said I embarrassed you, so I gave you what you wanted. I stayed quiet." He flinched at each word as though they were blows. Guests shifted uncomfortably, watching a son unravel before his mother, the balance of power reversed without a single raised voice. Helen sobbed louder now, her shoulders shaking. Some guests glanced at her, puzzled, but I understood. Her tears were not weakness. They were release. She had carried my pain with me, silently, and now that silence had been broken, it was spilling out in unstoppable waves. I reached once more for the ring beneath my dress, feeling its cool metal against my skin. My heart ached with both triumph and sorrow. This was not the way I wanted the truth revealed, not under chandeliers and gasps, not in front of 500 strangers. But fate had chosen this stage. The room was still buzzing, but inside myself I felt a calmness settle. Ethan stood there trembling, Charles beside him holding the microphone like a judge pronouncing sentence. And me, I remained silent because the truth no longer needed my defense. It spoke for itself, louder than humiliation, louder than laughter. And as Helen's sobs filled the edges of the hall, I thought to myself, this was not revenge. This was simply truth. And truth has a way of breaking chains in the quietest, most devastating silence. The moment Charles named me, the room's energy shifted as though someone had opened a hidden door and let in a storm. Conversations fractured into sharp whispers, laughter evaporated, and 500 pairs of eyes suddenly recalibrated their gaze. Those who moments ago found me laughable now scrambled to reassess. Respect and fear flickered in their expressions like candlelight struggling against a draft. It began with a man who had earlier compared me to his mother-in-law selling trinkets online. He stumbled toward my table, his face pale. "Ms. Miller," he stammered, I owe you an apology. I had no idea." I raised a hand gently, cutting him off without a word. Silence was enough. His voice faltered and he retreated. Shame etched into his cheeks. Then came others. Guests in expensive suits and glittering gowns rushed to correct themselves, suddenly eager to shake my hand, to assure me they respected me, had always respected me. Their words collided awkwardly, tripping over each other in desperation. I remained seated, still clutching the silver ring beneath the tablecloth, offering only faint nods. Their apologies were not for me. They were for themselves, to soothe the guilt of having misjudged. Across the room, I heard a different kind of whisper. Two of Ethan's colleagues leaned toward each other, their voices low but not low enough. "Can you believe he mocked her like that? His own mother?" The other shook his head. "Career suicide. You don't humiliate someone who signs your paycheck." Their words struck harder than their intent. Ethan's arrogance had not just wounded me, it had left him exposed, ridiculed by the very men he longed to impress. Emily stood beside him, her cheeks flushed crimson, her hands twisting nervously. She looked at her father with wide eyes, then back at Ethan as though searching for guidance, for rescue. But there was none. She had married into a storm, and the foundations were shaking before the ink on their vows was dry. I watched her carefully. I did not hate her. She was young, caught between loyalty to her husband and the crushing weight of her father's revelation. Still, the embarrassment burned through her polished smile. She excused herself from a group of relatives, muttering something about needing air, but I saw the tremble in her step. She had expected to gain a husband's pride and a family's stability. Instead, she had been dragged into a stage where her father's respect for me overshadowed her groom's. Ethan tried to salvage the moment, stammering half-hearted jokes, but his laughter was hollow. No one joined in. Even his closest friends looked away, their faces tight with discomfort. For the first time, I saw my son without his shield of charm. Stripped of arrogance, he looked small, uncertain, even afraid. I could have stood then, could have spoken to soften the blow, but I remained still. This was not cruelty, it was consequence, and consequences are not always meant to be softened. The weight of the evening pressed heavier with each passing minute. Apologies piled at my feet like discarded flowers, insincere and overwhelming. I felt no joy in them, only fatigue. The ring in my palm grew warmer, grounding me, reminding me of Daniel's quiet wisdom. Dignity is not taken, it is lived. I rose slowly from my chair. The crowd shifted, expecting me to speak, perhaps to deliver a triumphant declaration. Instead, I simply smiled faintly and inclined my head. Then I turned toward the exit. The golden light from the chandeliers followed me across the floor, glinting against the chain of the silver ring now visible at my neckline. It caught the light like a secret revealed, subtle yet undeniable. Behind me, the murmurs swelled. Some called my name, others whispered about Ethan's downfall, still others speculated about the true size of my empire. I did not answer. I walked steadily, each step echoing louder than words could. At the doorway, I paused and looked back once. Ethan stood in the center of the room, pale, broken, his hands limp at his sides. Emily clung to him, her face crumpled in silent humiliation. Helen sat weeping openly, her tears falling into her lap as though she were mourning years of disbelief finally undone. I wanted to run to her, to hold her hand, but I knew tonight was not for comfort. Tonight was for revelation. So I stepped into the corridor, the music resuming faintly behind me as though nothing had happened, but everything had. And as the golden light spilled over me, glinting against the silver ring, I understood one truth. Silence may have humiliated me for years, but tonight, silence had become my victory. The morning after the wedding, the world outside my window looked unchanged. Sunlight spilled across the rooftops, birds called faintly in the distance, and traffic hummed below as if life had carried on untouched. Yet inside me, everything was different. My body felt heavy, not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of truth finally revealed. For years, I had carried silence like armor. Now the armor was cracked open, and everyone had seen what was beneath. I brewed coffee slowly, the smell filling the small apartment. My hands lingered on the silver ring as I set the mug down, its chain cool against my skin. I had planned to spend the day in quiet reflection, perhaps even in mourning, not for Daniel this time, but for the fractured bond between mother and son. But before I could take my first sip, a knock rattled the door. Firm, desperate, relentless. I opened it, and there he was, Ethan, my son, my only child. His tuxedo from the night before was wrinkled, the tie gone, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with shame. And then, to my shock, he dropped to his knees right there in the hallway. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "please, forgive me." For a moment, time stilled. I stood in the doorway, the morning light casting long shadows across his bowed figure. The neighbors' doors stayed shut, yet I felt exposed, as though the whole world could see this man who once mocked me now kneeling like a child before his mother. I said nothing. Silence wrapped around us, broken only by his ragged breathing. He lifted his head, eyes wet. "I didn't know. I didn't understand. I thought you were ordinary. I thought you were trying to chase something impossible. I was wrong. God, I was so wrong." The words poured out of him, clumsy and raw. "I humiliated you in front of everyone, and then I found out the truth. I don't know how to undo it. I don't know how to make this right. Please, Mom, tell me what to do." Still, I held my silence. My grip tightened around this doorframe, steadying myself against the flood of emotions his words triggered. I had dreamt of this moment, my son realizing the truth, begging for understanding. Yet instead of triumph, I felt only sorrow. Apologies, no matter how sincere, cannot erase years of dismissal. nor can they erase the sting of public cruelty. Finally, I spoke. My voice was low, even, carrying none of the rage he might have expected. Ethan, I endured your jokes, your indifference, your contempt, because I thought silence was love. I thought giving you everything meant sacrificing myself. Last night showed me the cost of that choice. His eyes widened, his lips trembling. I'll do anything to fix it. Anything. Just don't turn away from me. I shook my head slowly. You want to fix it? Then stop asking for forgiveness like it's a transaction. Respect cannot be bought with apologies. If you truly want redemption, learn to respect the very things you once mocked. My age, my work, my quiet strength. Until you do, nothing changes. Tears slid down his face, and for once he didn't try to hide them. He bowed his head again, whispering, I will try, Mom. I swear I'll try. I let the silence stretch. The morning sun shifted, casting a warm glow over the hallway, glinting against the silver ring at my neck. I thought of Daniel, of the promise I had made to raise our son with love. I had kept that promise, though the cost nearly broke me. Now it was Ethan's turn to choose what kind of man he would become. At last, I stepped back from the door. Get up, I said softly. He rose slowly, unsteady on his feet, his face streaked with tears. Go home, I told him. Be a husband. Be better than you were last night. If you want me in your life, prove it not with words, but with respect. Until then, I will keep my distance. He nodded, his chin quivering, and turned to leave. I closed the door gently, the sound final, but not cruel. Leaning against it, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I walked back to the table, lifted the coffee mug, and let the warmth settle into my hands. The ring pressed lightly against my skin, a reminder that dignity, once reclaimed, must never again be surrendered. And in the stillness of that morning, I whispered into the empty room, if you want to redeem yourself, Ethan, learn to honor what you once despised. The week after the wedding, my name was no longer a whisper. It was printed in bold letters across business journals and splashed across financial websites. Headlines read, Miller Holding Seals, Landmark Partnership with Whitman Group. Photographs of Charles Whitman and me, shaking hands, appeared in the press, his expression proud, mine calm and measured. Reporters marveled at the revelation that the groom's mother, mocked publicly as a woman with a poor life, was in fact the force behind one of the most strategic acquisitions of the decade. Emails flooded in, calls jammed, my phone lines. Investors who had once ignored my proposals now clamored for meetings. Acquaintances who had looked through me at dinners suddenly remembered my number. Even distant cousins sent congratulatory notes, their words dripping with the eagerness of people desperate to rewrite history. It would have been easy to bask in it, easy to let the glow of recognition soothe the wounds carved by years of dismissal. But as each headline shouted my name, I felt a strange emptiness. The world finally saw me, yet the one person I had most longed to see me, my son, remained blind in all the ways that mattered. Family members who had once smirked at my little business began inviting me to gatherings with new warmth. Zoe, we always knew you had something special, one relative said with a too bright smile. I listened politely, but inside I wanted to laugh. They had not always known. They had dismissed me, mocked me, told me to act my age. Their tune had changed, but their hearts had not. At a dinner one evening, Helen leaned close to me, her voice low. They're all scrambling now, Zoe. It's almost funny, isn't it? The way they're bending over backward to praise you. I smiled faintly. Funny, yes, but hollow. She understood. She always did. Emily, on the other hand, surprised me. She approached me one afternoon with hesitation, her hands twisting nervously. Mrs. Miller, she began, then stopped, correcting herself. Zoe, her voice softened. I need to say something. I was wrong about you. I let Ethan's version of you shape what I believed, and when the truth came out, I realized how blind I had been." Her words carried no flattery, only a quiet sincerity. I studied her face, the shame there, the earnestness. For the first time, I saw not just my son's wife, but a young woman caught between loyalty and awakening. "Thank you, Emily," I said gently. "It means more than you know." But Ethan, my Ethan, remained unsettled. He called often, came by sometimes, always with the same desperation in his eyes. "Mom, I'm trying," he would say. "I'm learning to respect you. I'm learning to see you." Yet his words trembled with guilt, not conviction. I could feel his torment, the shame of what he had done, the weight of knowing the world had witnessed it. And while I forgave him in my heart, I could not gift him the absolution he craved. Not yet. Forgiveness without change is only permission. At night, when the city quieted and I sat alone with the silver ring pressed against my skin, I thought of Daniel. He would have smiled at the headlines, proud of what I had built. But he would have reminded me of something more important, that respect from strangers can never replace love from family. And in that reminder, my heart ached. Yes, I was recognized now. Yes, the world bowed where it once sneered. But the truth was clear. Applause from the outside could not fill the hollow space inside. The empire I had built was vast, yet the wound carved by my son's scorn lingered deeper than any public humiliation. I whispered into the night, the words for Daniel, but perhaps also for Ethan. I never needed the world's crown. All I ever needed was his honesty, his respect, his love. If I can have that, everything else is noise. The silver ring glinted faintly under the lamp, a reminder that my power had always come not from headlines, not from contracts, but from the quiet strength of keeping promises, even when it broke me. Life did not end with that wedding night. It changed. The headlines faded eventually, as they always do, but my work did not. Miller Holdings continued to grow, and so did I. A few weeks later, I sat once again at my desk, surrounded by contracts and folders stacked neatly in the same small apartment that had once been mistaken for failure. In front of me lay a new deal, the kind of contract that would ripple through entire industries. I picked up my old plastic pen, the same one I had bought years ago at a discount store, the one that had signed my very first acquisition. The ink skipped for a moment, then steadied, leaving my name across the paper in bold blue strokes. There was something poetic about it. The world could see me in boardrooms now, in newspapers, in press releases. Yet the truth of who I was remained unchanged. A widow at her kitchen table, signing her future with a cheap pen and the memory of her husband guiding her hand. Ethan visited often in those weeks, sometimes alone, sometimes with Emily. His apologies grew quieter, less frantic, as if he realized that words alone would never be enough. He offered to take me to dinner, to help with errands, even to review some of my business reports, though he barely understood them. I accepted his presence, but I held the boundary. Love did not mean surrendering dignity again. One evening, as he lingered by the door, he said, "Mom, I know it will take time, but I want to learn to respect you the way you deserve, not because the world does now, but because you are my mother." His voice cracked, and for the first time I believed he meant it. Still, I answered gently, "Respect is not something you say, Ethan. It is something you practice. If you want to heal this, show me." He nodded, and I saw both hope and torment in his eyes. I did not shut the door on him, but I did not let him all the way in either. That was the balance now. Love, but with boundaries drawn in ink, stronger than any contract. As the weeks turned to months, people who had once dismissed me began to treat me differently. They called with respect in their voices, sometimes even reverence, but I never let it intoxicate me. Recognition was a fleeting guest. What mattered was the work, the quiet building, the promises kept. I still held Daniel's silver ring close, pressing it between my fingers when the nights felt long. It reminded me that strength does not need applause, that love can survive even in silence. And it reminded me that being underestimated was never the end of my story. It was the beginning. So here I am, still building, still steady, still quiet in ways that many mistake for weakness. But I have learned that silence is not weakness. Silence is patience, discipline, and sometimes the thunder waiting at the edge of the storm. If there is one lesson I carry forward, it is this: never underestimate a woman past 50, because the silence she carries might be the very thunder that makes the world hold its breath. And now, dear listener, I want to ask you something. If you were in my place, would you forgive your son? Would you let him back into your heart after such humiliation? Or would you keep the distance as protection? Your reflections matter to me, and I would love to read your thoughts in the comments. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know below. We read every comment with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to join a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, and in second chances. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you are ready to open your heart. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.